I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge. It doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities.
Once something like eating is death, then you've struck at the very heart of life. The enemy of the older radical theories may have been the ruling class, but today the stakes of whether we will reform ourselves into a new kind of human being, a new kind of society, whether we will find selves worth being, the stakes of it are simply life itself.
Okay, well, here we are in Chapter 5 of Being There by Jerzy Kosinski. This is a novel about the shortcomings of a democratic system. It is about a timeless problem to a certain extent, which is that in any sort of democratic system, there's a tendency to choose the wrong type of person. And that tendency is exacerbated with advanced media, with advanced technology. And this novel was written in the 70s, so we're primarily talking about television. Definitely television is the target here. But radio and television were kind of like that first step into the amplification of a problem that is inherent in democracies, which is the tendency to choose the wrong person to lead, especially in times of stress and crises. In Chapter 5 of this book, by this Polish immigrant who is in a fairly good position, I think, Jerzy Kosinski, to assess American culture, media-obsessed American culture of his day. This book deals with this extremely handsome but not smart man whose real name is Chance and who has lived his entire life as the keeper of a garden, does not know how to read or write, is a good but simple individual who has to leave the house that he's lived his entire life because the man who owned it and who sheltered him died. And who by chance finds his way rapidly into the home of one of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the United States, Mr. Benjamin Rand, who is a mogul and very, very influential in the American financial system, but who is about to die. And we see that Chauncey Gardner is now, living with the Rands, has been endorsed by Mr. Rand, has been endorsed by the president who's met him and who's listened to his seeming advice about a metaphorical garden, which is the American economy, but which is actually Chance, the gardener, talking about gardening. And so Chapter 5, one of the things that happens early on in this chapter is that Mr. Rand's wife, assumes that he needs a secretary. She says to him, "Hey, you should just live here. Can you consider just living here with us for the time being? And if so," and of course he says yes, because where else is he going to go? He's homeless now. And she says, "Well, if you're going to be here, then you do need a private secretary because you've already become influential by being quoted by the president of the United States and going on national television. So clearly you need some help. Do you have any help?" And he says, "No, I don't." And so she hires an older lady who has done this work for, I believe, Mr. Rand before, somebody who will not compete with her because she is definitely in love with Chauncey. And so she doesn't want anybody to compete with her for his attentions. And when he meets with her, she says, "Well, what do you want me to get started on for you?" And he says, "Well, talk to E.E. about this." And so she very dutifully says, "Okay, well, I will be here." Now, the next thing that happens is Chance and EE end up going to the United Nations gala, basically. This big fancy affair where she introduces him to the Secretary General of the United Nations, who has already heard of him and so has expectations. And that kind of thing happens over and over again, where because they've already heard of them and they've seen that the President of the United States and Mr. Rand think that he's important, he's obviously important. So whatever he does and says is taken for something serious and important, and he has to know what he's doing. So whatever he says, no matter how nonsensical or simple it is something that must exude wisdom, and it's up to them who are less than he to figure out what he's saying. He meets him, and he says a few simple things about, yes, Mr. Rand is ill, he's not well at all. The ambassador to the United Nations, the Soviet ambassador, meets him, and he brings up the American economy, and he says, I want to be candid. Considering the gravity of your country's economic situation, it's clear that you will be called upon to play an important role in the administration. I have detected in you a certain reticence regarding political issues. But Mr. Gardner, after all, shouldn't we, the diplomats, and you, the businessman, get together more often? We are not so far apart from each other. And Chance touched his forehead with his hand and said, we are not. Our chairs are almost touching. The ambassador says, bravo, very good. Our chairs are indeed almost touching. So, see, Chauncey is simply stating a physical fact, because that's all he knows, is that they are close together. The ambassador, of course, takes it for a metaphor. Okay. Later on, a comedic turn happens where the ambassador notices that Chance seems to be speaking in bowl-like language, and he says he reminds him of Krylov, and he says, have you read Krylov's fables? And of course, Chance doesn't say anything. But then the ambassador actually starts to speak in Russian and quote from Krylov. And because Chauncey has never heard Russian before and it tickles his ears, he laughs. But that says to the ambassador that he knows Russian, and he got it. Oh my gosh, he's even smarter than anybody thought. He knows Russian. He doesn't continue to test him, though, or else they would have found him out. But so this becomes a part of Chauncey's mystique as well. Then he meets an ambassador from Germany. EE kind of arranges it so that Chance can sit next to a French representative. And this person says, Mr. Gardner, I heard the president's speech in which he referred to his consultations with you. I have read a lot about you, and I've also had the pleasure of watching you on television. He lit a long cigarette, which he had carefully inserted into a holder. I understand from the remarks of Ambassador Skrapanov that among your many accomplishments, you are also a man of letters. He looked sharply at Chance. My dear Mr. Gardner, it is only by accepting fables as a reality sometimes that we can advance a little way along the path of power and peace. I think this line is very, very telling. I think this is Kosinski himself acknowledging that this is a fable. This story that he's telling is a fable. And it is by accepting fables as our reality that we can advance a little way along the path of power and peace. I think he's saying, listen to what I am saying. If you really want to advance on the path of power and peace, you have to understand this is a danger of democracy. It is a danger that's inherent in democracy, and it's a danger that exists, especially since the age of television. Then he meets Lord Beauclerk, chairman of the board of the British Broadcasting Company. And that man says, I enormously enjoyed the bluntness of your statement on television. Very cunning of you, very cunning indeed. One doesn't want to work things out too finely, does one? I mean, not for the vidiots. It's what they want, after all, a god to punish, not a man of their infirmity. Eh? So there you have the most succinct summation of what a lot of people think that Chauncey's doing, which is to simplify, to boil down, to speak down to the common man. And the term vidiots there is reminds me of the movie Idiocracy. Right? In general, there was just a lot of angst in the 70s and 80s about where are we headed here? Are we all turning into vidiots, right? So he's sort of sharing with Chauncey, wink, wink, we're smart men, but we know we have to speak in these very simple fable-like terms and terms, and this is what people want from us. So there's really nothing that Chance can do or say that's going to bump people off their impression that he is important and really, really, really smart. Because he's clearly rich, he's with the right people, and he's in the position he's in, and the very position itself of being seemingly so influential, of being with the president, being quoted by the president, that automatically means that you're genius, basically. So it really doesn't matter what he does, people will find a way to reinterpret it. But at one point in the chapter, we see the president back at the White House saying to a secretary, why don't we know more about Chauncey Gardner? Give me a full dossier on him. And they come back and we can't find anything except for the most current news stories about him. Well, why can't we? Right? Like, where's his tax record? Does he have a driver's license? What's his business? And she basically is very uncomfortable. She says, I'll try. So we're beginning to see, people are probing to find out more. But what we don't see here is the president saying, my gosh, what have I done? I talked to somebody and quoted somebody who I don't even know. No, that's inconceivable, right? Inconceivable. So people don't go there. They want to know more about him. They think it's strange that they don't, but they never go into the zone of, what have I done? Yeah. Should I not have done my due diligence first? Could it be that he's a fraud? Could it be that there's a major mistake that's happened here? No, they will never go there because it's just inconceivable. It's completely unacceptable. The ambassador from Russia finds a rare first edition of Krylov's Fables and sends it to Chance because he wants to build an economic bridge with the United States, and of course he thinks Chance can help him with that. And the party goes on, and women flirt with Chance, and there's a publisher who comes along and says, hey, would you like to write a book with us? I think you'd make a great author. And Chance says, I don't write. And the publisher says, oh, who does these days? We can take care of that for you. And then Chance says, but I can't even read. And he says, oh, like, that's so honest of you. Nobody reads really anymore. He also gets questioned by, members of the media. Have you read this article about yourself? Have you read the New York Times? Have you read the Post? And he says, I don't read again. And they say, what do you mean you don't read? He says, I don't read. I watch television. And the reporter says, how refreshingly honest. Who has the courage to actually state what we all know? Nobody reads the papers anymore. everybody just watches TV. So it's hilarious, actually. Then towards the end of the chapter, there's a whole section on just how attractive Chauncey is physically, and because of the aura that's been created around him, which is really created by other people. He didn't create it. Nature didn't create it, except for his good looks. But, you know, the people themselves have created it. And if you didn't get that point already, Jerzy Kosinski makes it abundantly clear, because two people, a man at the party and EE, both try to have romantic relations with him in one evening, and both of them end up not having much contact at all, but doing it all themselves. Because Chauncey says that he likes to watch. And at the end of these encounters, they both feel like they've had incredibly meaningful, romantic experiences with Chauncey Gardner. They feel connection, they feel happiness, excitement. Whereas Chance, the book, gives us Chance's perspective primarily, doesn't even really know what's happened. It seems very strange to him. He's told them he likes to watch because he says, especially with EE, he doesn't really get anything out of touching a person in a particular place, because that's only one place. Whereas if you watch them, it's more like television. You get to see the whole picture. So why wouldn't you just watch? And they take that to mean his, the preference for how he wants to have relations with them. And so it's a very meaningful experience for them. And the reason why this is in here is because this is the perfect example of what people do with Democratic politicians. They project what they want into the person. And what they're really doing when they do that is they're falling in love with themselves. They're having relationships with themselves. And if themselves is ugly, and I did that on purpose, if themselves is ugly, then they're going to fall in love with ugly, and it's going to become the most meaningful thing in their lives. And if themselves is beautiful, they'll fall in love with beauty. But what they won't really have any relationship with is the other actual person, because that person has become a node, a vessel to be filled, a non-person, a sort of created being, a golem of sorts, made of inert matter that has become a pseudo-living being for them, that ties up everything that they think they want. And this is why that supreme, almost romantic, head over heels, blind love happens with some leaders in a democratic society, and in other societies too, is because of this phenomenon. And actually, we know this because it happens also in other romantic relationships of a much lesser level, right? Where people fall head over heels, and it's just the most amazing, eclipsing experience ever. But you only find out later you don't even know who you were with. So here we have it at the national level. And Kosinski is he's just like brutally exposing it here in the most sarcastic, funny way that you can possibly do, when these two people try to cozy up to Chance and he tells them, I like to watch, and they proceed to do what they think he wants. That might as well be us all when we get into the state in a democracy where our brains have turned off and we're head over heels in love with a person and an idea, because the idea is our idea, whatever that is. It's not necessarily shared with anyone else, but we think it is. Now, there's one more chapter in the book, which I think I will cover next time. No, there's two, actually. So I'll probably cover both of those next time. But I'm hoping that you're getting the picture here. Plato once said, through Socrates, that more or less democracy is the worst form of government except for all of the other bad choices. And democracy in the Republic, he says, democracy is like a patchwork quilt, a quilt of many colors, a cacophony. It has lots of vulnerabilities, and yet it's beautiful because it can allow people a lot more freedom than a lot of other forms of government. The problem with democracy is demagogues and rhetoricians who take advantage of that freedom and the inability of a lot of people to kind of stand their ground psychologically and emotionally, and to basically handle their own business rather than projecting it onto other people. Even back in ancient Greece, Plato knew this, but he said the democracy was the best of the imperfect regimes simply because it was better than all the other ones. That is what you have to keep in mind if you want to keep it. If you want to keep it, you have to understand it's flawed. It's never going to achieve the very greatest of things, perhaps, but it can afford people relative freedom only if they don't give it up and give it away. Anyway, we're almost done with being there. I hope that you're getting something out of this series. I know fiction isn't everybody's cup of tea, but sometimes fiction is the best way that you can teach certain perennial truths.